Okay, everybody, we're back. We're going to get started here. Again, my name is Brian Krug from the University of New Hampshire, and this is the webinar from e-GRO called PGR University, where Brian Whipker from NC State University and Joyce Latimer are giving us all the information that they know about PGRs in just one day. So it's a great webinar to be hosting. I want to thank our sponsor, Fine, for making this possible so that it's free to everybody that's attending the webinar. We are recording it, so if you aren't able to see everything, you can come back and watch these on the e-GRO.org website. We'll have those posted in 10 to 14 days. We do have the handouts available for you to download within the materials portion of your GoToTraining control panel. So feel free to download those. As the presentation is going, please type in your questions and we will address those at the very end. Without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Joyce Latimer from Virginia Tech University, and she is going to spend the next 25 minutes talking about branching agents. Before any farther, I need to unmute her so she can talk. Give me 1 second with that. There we go. Joyce, you should be able to talk now.
All right.
All right,
we can Brian, you hear me now?
We can hear you. All right, Joyce, it's all yours.
All right. All right, thanks, Brian. Before I get started, I will answer the question about Top Floor G. We have not actually done any work with that product, but I'm pretty sure that Paul Pilon has. So if you'll check out his website, Perennial Solutions, I think you'll find some answers to your questions there. Well, let me go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk about branching agents, and basically we're still talking about the tools, the PGR tools, and try to give you the information on how to use those effectively. As Brian said, he covered basically the growth controllers, and I'm going to cover what we call the structural enhancers, those that actually affect the architecture of the plant. And we're basically talking about the products here at the bottom. You can see the different trade names we're talking about, and then we have quite a few that we're going to try to cover in the next 20 minutes. So let's start with the branching agents, and we'll start with why we do this, and that is basically we're looking for a chemical approach to branching. Our goal is to improve the plant architecture and essentially substitute for pinching. Even if you're using the hedge trimmer that Brian showed you, pinching and shearing is a very labor-intensive project. And as he said, it does take a lot of growth away, so therefore it delays the production and typically delays the bloom. So what we're looking for is a chemical way to reduce apical dominance, reduce the activity of that bud so that it allows these lateral buds to grow out. That will give us an improvement in branching, which typically improves the quality of our plant, and a lot of times it can make those plants finish more quickly. So we have a lot of reasons for doing this. Let's start with e-GRO. e-GRO is an OHP product taken up primarily through leaf tissues, but it is soil active. It's 18% dikegulac sodium. Mode of action, as we think anyway, it induces leaky cells in actively growing terminals. So it effectively is a chemical pinch, so it reduces the apical dominance, as we mentioned. It does typically cause a little bit of leaf chlorosis, so it's recommended that you apply it early in the crop cycle so that you get that stimulation of branching, but you also allow ample time for that new growth to cover any yellowing or leaf necrosis. I will tell you that if you've used the older dikegulac sodium product, Atramec, the carrier that OHP is using in e-GRO is much, much softer. You'll find less phyto than you ever saw with Atramec. Again, actively growing plants, stress-free, and sufficient volume. I like to present what OHP calls their wow plants, and these are plants that really need branching and growth regulation, and you'll see some really good activity. One example here is lantana, and actually our control is over here on the right, and the treated plant 800 parts per million e-GRO is on the left. An increase in branching, a reduction in stem length, just a nice tight plant. Another wow plant is fuchsia, our untreated plant here. e-GRO at 400, 800, or 1600 parts per million. e-GRO typically will give you a little bit of growth regulation along with that increase in branching. Also on the wow plants you may be very interested in Calibrachoa and Petunia. couple of plants that we have worked with, Phlox paniculata is one we would really like to see some branching in the finished plants. And so we've done some treatments with up to 3,200 parts per million Augio, and you can see what I'm talking about with high rates in particular, or multiple applications at higher rates, you can get some significant growth reduction. But at these medium rates, we got an increase in branching, a slight delay in flowering, but basically they filled out in within a week of the controls, and a much nicer plant to start with. Goodness Grows, we've also looked at treating liners with Augio, and basically we're treating these liners as they come off of mist, so they're not fully rooted. Just after they come off mist, we'll make our applications and then evaluate the liners, the finished liners, as well as the finished plants after they've been potted up. You can see that at the higher rates, even at 800, we have a significant growth reduction, but just look at the huge number of branches we have in this plant and the liners. Finished plants, 5 weeks after potting up, we still have a nicely branched plant with this 400 parts per million. Still a lot of growth control at 816, so you're probably going to want to stay in that 400 to 800 parts per million range. Sedum Autumn Joy is another one that was very responsive to Augio. Significant increases in branching with all rates at the liner stage. And we actually looked at making multiple applications, treating in the liner stage just after rooting, and then again just after the plants were transplanted into their final containers. And these plants here on the bottom were treated twice, and they've been in the pots for 5 weeks. You can see we had a significant increase in branching with the multiple applications. 800 parts per million still gave us some growth regulation. 1600 you don't want to duplicate. That's really too high to do multiple applications. These are still showing just a little bit of that yellowing that we see with Augio, but given if they were in bigger pots and given another week or so, we believe they would have covered just fine. So there are a lot of opportunities here for Augio as a branching enhancer. So let's talk about Configure. Configure is a Fine Americas product. It's the benzoadenine. It's now out there as a 10% product, and it has labeled uses, particularly as a branching agent. Registered for hosta and holiday cactus. Those were uses that were very long-term, old uses in floriculture. And then we looked at a few other crops that would fit on that label. An important thing to note is that BA stimulates but does not cause branching or flowering. So it's really important to apply it during what we call these windows of opportunity. It also has a very short period of activity. A week or maybe 2 weeks in the plant is about all that you can handle. And therefore the multiple applications are very beneficial. Complete spray coverage is required and a slow drying time. We'll talk about that. Because it is not actively transported throughout the plant. As Brian mentioned, BA has been used on Christmas cactus for a long time. Depending on when you apply it, you will get either an increase in the number of leaves, the number of phyllocades, or an increase in the number of flower buds. And notice these rates are pretty low. Hosta is another crop that BA has been used on for a very long time, particularly in the nursery industry, but the rates are much higher, up to 3,000 parts per million or multiple applications. This is a grower trial with BA. Excellent results, increase in branching from the rhizome. This is some work from Paul Pilon. Again, very nice breaks. We started looking at other perennials that may be responsive to BA, and one that we thought could really use some help with some basal branching and pot fill was echinacea, and we found excellent results and improved lateral branching with echinacea. We've looked at a lot of different cultivars, and a lot of other researchers have worked with other cultivars, and they are consistently responsive to Configure. And one of the things I like to point out with echinacea is that they actually increase the capacity of the plant to branch. A lot of the plants that we treat, we get an early increase in branching, but by the time the plants finish, they're not any different from control. But with echinacea, our treatments will increase the number of branches anywhere from 2 to 4 times, and you will see a persistent improvement in the branching of that plant in the finished crop. We can't do much about flowering, but we are getting a good control, good increase in lateral branches, basal branches with the Configure treatments. This example shows white swan. This was a study we did looking at when to apply the configure. We applied it at the time of transplanting and at 1, 2, or 3 weeks after transplanting. And at 8 weeks after planting, when all the plants were basically finished and starting to flower, we saw that all of the treatments resulted in a significant improvement in the number of branches. Basically, our treated plant here was running about 8 to 9 branches compared to less than 2, about 2, on our control plant. But what was interesting, if we go back to look at 4 weeks after planting and look at the effect that the treatments, sorry about that, that the configure had earlier, we can see that we had an increase in the number of branches with these early applications. We're getting very close to saleable plants for a quart size, as selling of green, of course. So we do get earlier pot fill if you can increase the number of branches coming up in that pot. So just a summary of a few key points for echinacea. If you're doing spring plantings and spring applications, make your first treatment in the plug flat or within 3 weeks after planting those plugs. The plant should be actively growing with good root growth, and we recommend a single application of 600 parts per million, or you can do multiple applications of 3 or 600. We have not seen any phyto with 600 parts per million if you keep this 2-week interval. So make sure you give a 2-week interval even if you're using the lower application rates. Summer and fall, if you're overwintering these, go ahead and treat them when you get them in, just like we're talking about for the spring planting, but then repeat that configure application in the spring. I think you'll be very happy with the results you get on configure on echinacea. We have looked at a variety of other herbaceous perennials, and it does substitute very nicely for the pinching and shearing, and we can get better pot fill. We're looking for an improvement in pot fill, an increase in the number of shoots, branches, and for a plant like this, Gora, we did have, again, that increased capacity. It was better than the control beyond the finished plant time. Just a summary sheet here, that is a slide that is in your handout to give you some of the results we've seen. All of these were with a single application at 600 parts per million, and based on our newer research, we think that you can go back with these that only show response in 2 weeks, give them a second application, and you may see a more persistent improvement in the number of branches. We've also done a good bit of work with perennial liners, and we can get an improvement in the number of branches and the shoot dry weight. Example here of Shasta Daisy and Lavender. Sedum Autumn Joy, the same response. We also looked at multiple applications, both in the liner stage, as I described with Agio. You can see that if we treated that only one time at the liner stage, we did not have a persistent improvement in branching with the finished plants. However, if we made that second application within a few days after transplanting, you can see that we've had 2.5 times the number of branches on that treated plant as we did on the untreated control. So multiple applications are definitely the key to using these branching enhancers. Just a summary on perennial liners for configure. You will get an improvement in branching. I recommend that you do apply it after rooting, just after the plants come off of mist. We have tried earlier applications, and yes, we can reduce rooting, we can reduce root growth. Typically, if we apply it late in the rooting stage, those plants will grow out just fine, but we have seen a significant reduction in rooting if you apply it earlier than the time the plants come off mist. We have seen some phytotoxicity on some crops. In particular, I would avoid aster. We've tried several cultivars and seen a significant phytotoxic response. Again, multiple applications, a minimum 2-week interval, and here's our website if you want to see pictures of other crops that we have looked at. Ethifon, running out of time here. There are 2 products now available for Ethifon. You're probably familiar with Florel. Vine Americas has a product out now called Colate, been out 2 years now, I think. Much higher active ingredient, a very wide range of effects on crops. Again, you're probably familiar with abortion of flower buds and flowers, but what we're looking at is controlling that and getting the increase in branching and sometimes the growth regulation. These are some general rates. As we continue to do research, we're refining these drench and liner soak rates. I'll talk about those a little bit. Brian will talk about them as well. The problem is these responses can be much less predictable than with a lot of our other PGRs. So you really need to do your own trials, but it's relatively inexpensive, so you can afford to do your own trials. Some of the keys to use is you have to pay attention to the application details. This is on the label that you must acidify that solution to a final pH of 4 to 5. So you want to make sure that your irrigation water will support that. As Brian said, this is one where you're going to want to let that solution dry slowly over 4 hours or so to enhance the uptake. Definitely avoid applications to stressed plants. This is some seed geraniums treated with Ethifon. It just exacerbates the stress. You don't want to do that. We mentioned bud abortion or flower removal. You want to make sure you make any applications early enough that you can get those flowers back on before sale time. We typically say 6 to 8 weeks before sale should be your last Ethifon treatment. The drench applications and the liner soaks, I think, will give you a lot more options for using Ethifon, but again, there are a lot of variables in there, so you are going to have to conduct your own trials. This is probably what you've seen before with using Ethifon on your geraniums. 500 part per million spray will give you a significant increase in the number of shoots and branches on your geranium. This is a Veronica study that we did with liner soaks, and with all of our Ethifon treatments, whether it was as a liner soak or as a foliar spray, did increase the number of branches relative to our control. We did a pinched comparison, and that actually did decrease the number of liters, but overall had the same number of branches. Another example of drenches, and this was with Veronica Goodness Grows, and treatment applied 1 week after transplanting. All of these drench treatments did give us a significant increase in the shoot, the number of branches in the shoots. The optimum was in this 100 part per million range. Our control, our spray control, was essentially a 500 part per million Ethifon spray, which did not actually increase the number of branches. So we are finding some increased activity with the drenches. Real quickly on the growth promoters, Brian mentioned these just a little bit as well. We have 2 products that are combinations of GA and BA, that's Fascination and Fresco. They are used for prevention of leaf yellowing and to delay flower senescence in lilies, also to increase leaf and bract size in poinsettia, and to increase stem length. We'll talk about those. This is some work that Eric Runkle has done on using Fascination on poinsettias. If you look at your controls, you have a nice bract size. We typically see a reduction in bract size with bonsai. This is a bonsai drench. You can see the actual amounts down here. If we apply 3 parts per million, notice how low that is, 3 parts per million Fascination, 30 days after that bonsai drench, we can pretty much restore that leaf area. And Eric has prepared a website with a set of guidelines on how to use Fascination or Fresco on poinsettia. So if you're doing poinsettias, I would encourage you to check that out. We have also done a little bit of work with the combination products. This is Fresco on Phlox paniculata. You can see that we did get some improvement in branching. This was not a persistent effect to the finished plants. And once you get into these high rates, you can see the effect that GA has on stimulating stem length. So it was not a real positive, it didn't serve the purpose we were looking for. But if you have an overdose of a PGR in your plug flat, you're looking for something that will help those plants grow out. You're looking to stimulate growth. And so what we're seeing with the Fresco, the Fascination, these products are labeled for use of reversal of retardant effects, growth retardants. If you have a plug like this, these were plugs that were planted and simply did not grow out, you can go in with very low rates, again starting at 1 to 3 parts per million, treating with the Fresco. Look to see what your response is within 5 days. After 5 days, you should see a response, and if you don't, you can go back in and make multiple applications. Really, you want to sneak up on this. Like Brian said, it's like stepping on the gas, and it's really hard to go backwards on that. So let's talk quickly about GA and flowering. The gibberellin 3 is the active ingredient in Florgib and Progib, and these are used more for enhancing flowering through breaking dormancy of plants like azalea. Obviously, the timing and the rate of that are going to be very critical to the use. And then also these products will promote earlier and more uniform flowers, typically used on azalea and cut flowers. Again, it is a very, very potent growth promoter, and it is also soil active. So follow those label recommendations very carefully. So in summary, we've got a lot of PGRs that are available to you, and we're trying to help you expand your PGR toolbox. The structural products down here are available for a lot of different uses and will definitely be advantageous to you as part of your production practices, your best management practices for producing optimum crops. And I think I have a few minutes for questions now as well.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Joyce, we do have some questions. The first one is, are there difference in reactions / results between vegetative varieties and seed varieties?
That's a good question. And at this point, I can't say that I know. We've not done any direct comparisons. For crops like your echinacea, it seems to be fairly uniform. As far as their response to configure, it doesn't seem to matter if it's a seed cultivar or a tissue culture cultivar. But I have not done any direct comparisons.
Okay. When using Florel, what additive is recommended for acidifying the solution to get the 4 to 5 pH values?
There are a couple of them out there. I think the one that we have used in our trials is Phase 5, or is there another one called Indicate 5? These are basically buffering solutions that you can add. I would check with your hort distributor about what's available in your area, but yes, there are some products available for that purpose.
Okay. In relation to the work that you've worked on with the poinsettias, have you done any work with any of the different colored poinsettias, the whites or pinks, using the GA/BA products? And if yes or no, and if depending on that, do you think that there would be a difference or any effect on the different colors that would be different from the reds?
The poinsettia work that I showed was Eric Runkle's work from Michigan State University, and I know he has done some work on the different colors and whitening the whites, but I am not familiar enough to talk about his work. Go to the website that I showed there, and I'm sure you'll find excellent materials on all of those issues related to the poinsettia production.
Okay. A question about Florel sprays on geraniums. What could be causing some lower leaf yellowing on the geraniums after a Florel spray? The plants in questions were watered prior to the spray, and the Florel was applied first thing in the morning.
Well, typically what causes the additional yellowing is either stress in the plants or an over-application, a rate that's too high. The grower would need to look at whether or not those cultivars were just especially sensitive and needed a lower rate. And this may be something that Brian can address a little bit more in our questions at the end of the session as well. But typically what I've seen, it's been excessive rate or stress conditions. And if you applied early in the morning, that was probably not a stress, but it's just a cultivar that was more sensitive to the ethifon.
Question about GA and propagation. Using GA in propagation of vegetative cuttings, will that promote rooting?
I have never heard anyone suggest that GA would promote rooting. So no, I would think that that would be more of a negative effect in terms of expansion. Remember, GAs increase cell expansion, not cell division. So I cannot think of any advantage to having GA in your rooting system.
Okay. And if I think I'm reading this correct, is that can a grower use a branching PGR to control growth, to control height?
The using a branching agent to control height it depends. For example, I showed you Augio definitely can be used to control height. And we run on the premise that if you increase the number of branches, you're increasing the distribution of resources, and therefore you should have a reduction in plant height. But for products like Configure, I have never really seen a reduction in plant height. It's on the label, but we have not really seen it as any normal result from using Configure. Ethifon, on the other hand, definitely does have some stem elongation reduction properties. So it depends very much on which PGR you're talking about and which crops you're using it on.
Okay. Again, back to Florel on geraniums. When is the best timing for applying Florel on geranium cuttings?
I honestly cannot answer that. I'm sure that Brian could answer that if you want to pick it up again in our joint session later.
Okay. Well, I think that ends our time here. Unless, yeah, okay, here's one more quick one. What is the ideal pH for a final solution? I'm guessing this is for Florel, yes.
Okay. For Florel, it's going to be between 3.5 and 4.5, and that's for the activity of Florel. For plant safety, and we'll talk about this more in the final session, I would say between 4 and 5. So basically in terms of the safety of the plant to that pH as well. But definitely keep it below 5.
Okay. Again, people are asking about the research on the top 4G on perennials.
Again, I have not done any of that myself, but I'm pretty sure that Paul Pilon has. And so if you'll go to his website, that's Perennial Solutions. Just Google Paul Pilon Perennial Solutions, you'll get his website. I think you'll find some of his research results on that there.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up here. We'll take a lunch break.